Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. In today's episode, let me start off by saying the audio might be a little bit echoey today. That's because I'm in a new space. The old space is being repainted for reselling purposes. But anyway, now you know. So, we are here to talk about that very contentious issue of metagaming. And in the last episode, we looked at why is metagaming bad. And if you haven't watched that episode, I would suggest you head on over to the previous episode and watch that, because it explains what metagaming is and why it's bad. So this video assumes that you've already watched that video and you know what metagaming is. So, why is metagaming good? Well, there have been lots of debates and discussions happening on the comments section of the previous video. And the long and short of metagaming is it's about avoiding using your own real-world knowledge, your own life experience, and projecting that into a character who might not necessarily have that. A hobbit who's lived on a farm doesn't know about conniving politics and highfalutin backstabbing. A starship captain knows nothing of the Archon. A detective in 1945 has no idea about immediate communications or things like that. So how do we avoid bringing that into our game in a good way? Well, let me start by saying that the easiest way to use metagaming for good is to use it. What do I mean by that? The whole idea behind metagaming is that we don't want to break the immersion factor. We don't want our character to know everything. So let's say your character comes across trolls and they kill trolls, and these are standard D&D trolls, which means that they regenerate slowly or quite rapidly over time if they're not set on fire or burned with acid. A lot of veteran players will know that because they've fought lots of trolls and they carried flasks of acid around, or lots of matches basically. That's you as the player. Your character, however, this is the first time they've fought a troll and wouldn't know what to do with it afterwards. So they might cut it up, chuck it into the river, or, as most adventurers would do, cut it up, search it, and then leave it whilst carrying on to town. Of course, that troll would regenerate, find them all, and attack them, and assumedly they've used a lot of their resources to combat it in the first place. Now they're even more taxed because they haven't replenished. How then would you use metagaming in a good way? Well, your metagaming knowledge tells you what to do with the troll afterwards, but your character doesn't know. The easiest and most entertaining way is if you ask yourself the question, is this metagaming? And the answer is yes. You shouldn't apply your knowledge to the situation. But that may not result in a very happy ending. So what you can do is then you turn to the GM and you say, my character's a little bit suspicious of this troll. It still stinks from here to next Tuesday, and I want to look at it closely because it seems weird. It's like a plant or something, you know what I'm saying? That gives your GM the opportunity to say that you can see that the wounds are closing. You say the wounds are closing? Still smells fishy to me. Stab it again. What happens? Oh, the wound starts to close. Fellas, it looks like this troll's still alive. Or at least healing itself. How do we fix that? That's still using your player knowledge, your metagaming knowledge, that trolls regenerate, but in a way that A, has engaged your fellow characters, it's now asking for their input, and B, has created a nice, interesting little story. And, I felt it was necessary, little mannerism whenever the character is dealing with the unknown or with something that smells like troll. So, that's one very good way of using metagaming, to include others, because then they can come over and one of them can be a wizard and can look down and go, well, I hit it with firebolt. Ah, that doesn't seem to regenerate. Well, maybe it's fire. Or let me try Melf's acid arrow. Oh, that doesn't work either. Well, then let me try this. It's exactly the same as a lot of us who have been watching Star Trek forever would know that cloaked birds of prey leave small tachyon emissions in their wake. And we also know that in 2366 or 67, it's been a while, that the Federation set up a tachyon detection grid using lots of starships. If you're playing in an era before that happened, well, we know for almost 180 years before then, the cloaked ships were very, very nearly invisible. So you can't have your science officer go, it would be logical to scan for tachyon emissions, because we know that warbirds, we don't know that, at least not in that time period. So you'd need to work out a very cunning way where you run multispectral phase analysis of the surrounding space where the bird of prey was. You do all kinds of other things first. Then you go and have a conference with the engineer, and you chat with the engineer and the chief helmsman and maybe a warp field specialist. And then only do you go, well, we think that cloaks generate tachyons. We're not entirely sure why, because tachyons, well, let's not go there. The point is made is that a good use of metagaming is to incorporate your fellow players. Get their characters involved and work through the solution that you already know. And yes, it might feel a little bit like, but we know that everyone here at the table knows this, right? Everybody knows this. Yes? Yes? Everybody knows this? Okay, good. We're all going to do that. Well, that's okay if you're playing the game part of role-playing games, and we've had lots of debates on those too, but isn't it more interesting to turn it into a story where the GM can insert new information and have new opportunities to warp your fragile little minds? I think it is. So as a player, I would far rather include my fellow players than just metagame my way through it. Now, the other option in terms of how to use metagaming in a good way is for those situations where your character has slept through a battle, or perhaps your character was on the shuttle approaching the Star Destroyer and couldn't possibly have known what was happening on the Star Destroyer. How do you get your character to have knowledge that could potentially change the course of the battle between the Jedi and the Sith that are busy fighting on that Star Destroyer without you actually knowing it? You as the player know it, your character doesn't. Well, if you are the sort who likes to be involved and you like to have that kind of opportunity, something that you can do, and this helps with character, which helps with story, is you can create a trait that is specific to your character. Well, my character is actually a bit of a busybody. So whilst we're flying in on that shuttle, flying casual and pretending to be who we are, there's nothing stopping me from opening up the comms channel and saying, so, what you guys been up to? Been crushing rebels recently? Doing cool stuff, right? Yeah? Then your GM has the opportunity of saying, you hear this in the background, you hear that in the background, or the operator returns saying, we're under attack, call for help, whatever the case might be. In other words, if your character is a snoop, if your character is a busybody, if your character is somebody who is genuinely caring about his fellow characters and doesn't know their situation, if your character is simply a good-natured woman who wants to make sure that everybody is safe and happy, or maybe they're just talkative, and in that talking they ask questions like, what are you doing, why are you doing that, where did you go, what did you do before, what were you doing 5 minutes ago, why didn't you tell me? You can build in personality traits into your character that allow you to ask those metagame questions in a character-based way. Obviously, you can't react to situations that are happening, but there's nothing stopping you if we're going with that scenario of the vampire in the corridor and your character was asleep. Check out the previous video if you don't understand what I'm talking about. There's nothing stopping you from saying, oh, my character wakes because of bad back, or he's got, on his mind, he's busy wondering how to take these dwarvish citadels. Then the GM may afford you the opportunity of making a perception check to hear what's going on. You hear a scuffle, you come out into the corridor, and then before you immediately attack, you turn around, and again, here is the next type of metagame advantage that you have. Turns around, and instead of attacking the vampire immediately, says, oh, I didn't know we had guests. Would you like a cup of tea? So you can, by being a friendly character, by being a snoop, by being a busybody, by being a caring type of character, you can involve yourself in those conversations. And most importantly of all, what that does is it pushes you as the player to engage your fellow players' characters and to ask them questions. Frequently, I see this around my tables. My guys and the ladies, none of them communicate with each other on that kind of personal level. It happens very rarely. And when it does happen, suddenly there's this magical moment where it's almost weird because we're not sure if we're in character or if we're playing, but this is something that's very emotionally intense, far more so than the dice could ever determine or dictate. So again, let's look at another advantage of knowing and using your metagaming. It's to build tension. This whole game is about tension and release, tension and reward, tension and humor or horror and breaking the tension. The dice give us tension, the GM gives us tension. We can give it back. By metagaming and by knowing what the outcome should be, that troll is going to wake up, by turning your back on the troll, by turning away from the cloaked starship, by going, oh, I know we should press the red lever because that's what I heard so-and-so get told, but so-and-so has forgotten it, but I wasn't there, so I can't remind so-and-so that they should remember it. By knowing that that's going to happen, and by going, yes, that's what I should do. What I shouldn't do is press the green button. And then you press the green button. Because it leads to a more interesting narrative. And unless your GM is one of those GMs who likes to railroad and to make sure that players follow logical, meaningful progression rather than a narrative progression, your GM will give you some kind of clue or hint, or yes, they will release the monster, but the monster won't be nearly as bad as it could have been perhaps. Or maybe it is bad, but the GM also recognizes that you weren't metagaming and that you were setting up tension and then will help you in another way. So metagaming in that way allows you to create tension. It allows you to create some very funny moments. You know there's an ogre around the corner, but your character doesn't, so he walks backwards whistling a tune whilst laughing at the other players' characters for being such scaredy cats. Whump, he gets hit by the ogre. What a lovely moment. That moment wouldn't have existed if you went, well, my character doesn't know there's an ogre there, but I know there's an ogre there, so I'm not going around the corner. That humorous moment's lost. It's gone. So that's another benefit to metagaming. And then finally, the last point about metagaming is that metagaming, when your fellow players metagame. In the past video we said, oh, you should point it out, hey, you are metagaming, thou shalt not metagame, thou metagamist. That's changed now with how to make it into a good thing. If a character suddenly says, oh, but we can take the stairs because you got told that last week, don't you remember? I remember being told it now that you reminded me, but I also remember that you were there. So how the hell are you reading my mind? Oh my God, this is so useful. We throw him into the room with the Theathalid because two mind readers together are going to completely destroy one another, right? You've now created tension, you've called out that other player on the metagame, but instead of breaking the session, instead of stopping and going, thou shalt not metagame, you have now turned it into a moment. Now, it becomes a little bit tedious if everything has to be metagamed in this way where you're creating narratives around all these points and things. So this is a balance. Everything in moderation, as they say. Metagaming for good, metagaming for bad. You want to avoid the bad at all costs. The metagaming for good is something to use as a discretionary power. Either your character knows it or they don't know it. If they don't know it, you have a choice. Either I turn it into this narrative story where I'm engaging my fellow players and we're all working together to come up with this really cool solution, or I don't take it further and it stops there because my character doesn't know it. So it's an either or, really. And you can apply it to certain circumstances, and then other circumstances you don't apply it to. Otherwise, it does become a little bit tedious. But that, in a nutshell, is for me how metagaming can be both good and very good and bad. Because ultimately, it is a game, we are bringing ourselves to it, and to get really, truly, deeply into character is nigh on impossible given today's circumstances, and with the invasion of technology and. So how do we mitigate? How do we make it better without losing anything? And metagaming for good is, in my opinion, the best way that you can handle storytelling, because it's definitely not losing anything, it's adding to it continuously. Bottom line, if you're worried about metagaming, involve your fellow characters in trying to find a solution through discussion, through the available skill checks, through the available roles, and by letting your GM realize that you are trying to work a solution for your character, not as a player. Until next time, hit that like button, hit that comment button. You can join us on Patreon and join me in a game that I run weekly. Otherwise, have fun, enjoy, and happy playing.